Доброго дня всім. Я рада вітати всіх на нашому заході і всіх, хто долучився до нами тут в Zoom-дискусії, а також в Фейсбуці на нашому онлайн-трансляції, на презентації дослідження «Безпека людини», дослідження, очікування, оцінка мешканців та мешканок.
Human security, the evaluation of the expectations of the residents of the 4 regions of Ukraine, Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia and Kherson region. I would like to introduce myself. My name is Sofia Olinik and I'm the coordinator of the Support for the Democracy program, and I'm going to be moderating our event today. Before we start the event itself, I would like to add up a little bit of the technical moments, except for the interpretation that you have already heard about. I would like to also mention that our presentation is being recorded and is going to be then later on published in the internet and in our local resources. And I would like to once again draw your attention that each and every one of us should choose a language that you would like to tune in. It's going to be either Ukrainian under the title Portuguese or English. So our presentation is going to be built further on. We're going to have an hour to present you the research and the main conclusions for the research and the report, and half an hour for the questions that you have. You can post the questions in the chat box, which is on the lower panel. We're going to read those out, and each of our speakers and presenters will be able to answer all of your questions that will appear there. Also would like to mention that in case of the hate speech, we're going to block those participants out of the conversation. So we are asking you to have respect to all of our participants and be tolerant to all of our participants in the discussion and in the presentation. This is basically all from our technical sides and our technical details, and I'm really pleased to invite our today's speakers, distinguished speakers who have joined our report, who are the authors of our research, and we wouldn't have any opportunity to talk about that today. So please welcome Oksana Mikheeva, who is the head of the Department of Social Science of Ukrainian Catholic University. Oksana, I think you can also add up for what are your main mandates. Yes, Oksana, I'm the professor. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, the professor of Ukrainian Catholic University. Thank you very much. Natalia Zaitseva-Chupak, who is the head of the Ukrainian Center for the Research of the Public Opinion, Socio-Info. Van Vitlinsky, who used to be the deputy head of the Donetsk Civil and Military Administration, and Yevhen Glebovitsky, who is the head of the expert group Promova. I'm pleased to welcome all of you, and before we start the discussion on the conclusions itself, I will give a brief prehistory of why we started to speak about human security. We actually have the term security, but here we're speaking about the human security. What is it about? Because first of all, what were the general understanding for us? What do we feel when we speak about security? We mostly speak about the law enforcement, we speak about some military actions that took place. But the recent years has shown us that safety and security is much broader term. We're living in the pandemic conditions, in the lockdown conditions, and security is about our healthcare as well. It's something that gives us the opportunity to feel comfortable and to feel protected. Security is also about whether my human rights are protected, whether I can execute them fully. So we've decided that we would like to research those issues under the challenges of the 2020, to understand it in the broader scope, just to figure out how the population sees human security, what is needed for the population to feel yourself safe. We had the local elections quite recently, and we have the new level of expectations from the local government and from the government and authority overall on what is needed so that Ukrainian population would feel safe in whatever places they're living now. So that is why we've had this concept of the human security as the main research point, and we're trying to figure out what does this term conveys for Ukrainian population of the certain regions. What are the threats? What are the assumptions? What are the concerns? How should we build our policies and further on activities based on that? Having that said, I would like to pass the floor to our panelists, and I think we will start with Natalia Zaitseva-Chupak, who will be who has been conducting this research, who have been collecting the data. So I do believe, Natalia, you've managed to collect this data under very tight schedule under the election campaign. So please tell us a little bit about the methodology, and please tell us about the process of the research itself. Please, the floor is yours. We can't hear you. Please unmute your microphone. Yes, yes, sorry. So once again, good day, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Natalia Zaporizhia. I represent the Social Inform Agency. So we had conducted this research. We have conducted this research with the Heinrich Böll support. We have conducted the research starting from the 18th of July up till the 11th of September, and we had two components in our research. There has the quality and quantity component. In the moment of the quantity component, we have questioned and surveyed more than 1,000 people in the four regions, Zaporizhia, Kherson, and also under Donetsk and Luhansk regions that are under Ukrainian government control. The research has been conducted by the KPI method, so that was basically the face-to-face interviewing with using of the computer technologies. There's also the choices of the survey has been built representatively, specifically for each of the regions. We had 250 persons in each of the regions that have been surveyed. We have been working also as well as a stratificational quota methodology. We have considered the specific quotas for that, like the type of the settlements. So it has to be represented the regional centers, the smaller towns, villages, as also considering the size of the population of the settlement. We wanted to select the cities equally for the cities with more than 500,000 populations, cities with the less population, cities between the 20,000, 50,000 population, and we also try to include the cities with less than 20,000 people residing. As well, we've used a specific approach to gender and age surveyed. We can also say that if we will consider the overall research, if we have 3.1% of the possible fluency in our research, if we do not consider the design effects, we are basically saying that there are more closer than 50%. If we speak about the very specific moment, then there can be slightly higher fluctuancy, that will be 6.2, but this is still acceptable for the indicators close to 50%. Quality-wise, what we presuppose, we wanted to control the quality of the work because we had a specific method of the research that has been used, so we've had this opportunity to control the quality of the work based on the GPS navigation, and we've also controlled at least 50% of all of the interviews that have been conducted. Our research has also included the additional point of the quality, but we had the focus groups. We had 8 focus groups conducted in each of the regions, 2 per each of the regions that we've covered. We've covered as well the city population and the rural population of each of the regions. So basically, we've had conducted the research and survey with the representatives of the regional centers and other cities of the region, and with the representatives of the rural population of the corresponding regions. As well, we've covered the representatives of the villages that are now the part of the amalgamated territorial communities and outside of the amalgamated territorial communities, because we've had an assumption that maybe it will somehow influence on how safe and secure the Ukrainians will feel themselves, whether they are included in the amalgamated community or no. We've also had 8 depth interviews with the respondents who are active in the civil work, who are having the specific position, or they are somehow included in providing security needs for the people in those 4 regions. And we've as well represented that proportionally in this region to people in each of the regions that we researched. This research has covered many different key topics that we wanted to cover. Well, like, we're really interested in the demographic parameters of the respondents. We've also were interested in age, gender, the social position, the level of income, how they understand what security is and what safety is, whether they feel themselves safe and secure, how do they personally feel that they can be protected and safe. We've also were interested in their political preferences and their political mind frame, and of course we couldn't leave the topic of healthcare aside. The elections, of course, they've made their mark on how the research has been conducted. As for we've had this little bit highly politicized environment, but I would like to say that our respondents were really good in reacting to the topic of our research when they have heard that it's not about the political issues, when the research is about their own life, their own safety. They've agreed to participate in the survey gladly. Thank you. Thank you, Natalia. There's one important thing that I wanted to identify it as well, that it was very important for us in the framework of our research to listen to the point of view of the general population. We wanted to take understanding of what the Ukrainians living in different cities and the settlements, what they feel, what they think about it. Many times we see that the documents, they should actually represent everything that is really taking place in the field. Thank you very much, Natalia. I do believe we can pass the floor to Oksana Mikheeva because she will tell us a little bit more in details about the key conclusions and what are the data that Natalia's team has gathered, how we have analyzed this data, what our population understands under the term of the human security, and whether we can find the answers to those issues. What are the threats? What are the concerns? Oksana, the floor is yours. Just a second, just a second. I do hope that you can see my presentation on the screen. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present you with the results. Thank you very much, Natalia. That is one again our partnership, and I'm always really happy to participate, to collaborate with Natalia, because they are doing the very high quality and very controlled results. And thank you very much for those results. I can start already speaking about what we've managed to analyze from the result that you have provided us and what analyzed with us. And I can continue, that is, most of the time is not considered in most of the reports and in most of the surveys. It was really important for us to talk to them as well. And this high quality mix, we have united the quantity and quality methods, which provided us to take a look at different angles. If we see the overall understanding of the security for the participants of our research, that was our first step. That was the question from our quality part. Like with no hints, we've just tried we've just asked people to explain us what they understand under security. That was an open, broad question that didn't set any kind of mind frame to think about it. And it really helped us to build up this model of security that exists currently for the populations of the territory that we have provided our survey. So basically all of the participants of our survey, they believe or they construct it as the full and broad functioning and adequate administration of different spheres of life of the society that builds up the feeling of the comfort and protection. So it's basically not about the law enforcement itself. It's not just protecting some certain issues of the physical safety and security. The population states a very broad notion of things. And this model, if we will gather it share by share, it they urging for. What we mean under that? We understand that there is a certain desire to feel the certain level of stability in their everyday life. And there is the opportunity, there is the desire not to live under this consumer budget when people are living from one salary to another. Then there is the issue of the physical security. In the rhetorics that has been voiced out to us in the survey, that there is the important notion of being protected against violence in everyday life. Another component of the model is the available medical services and healthcare services provided. We will discuss it more in those moments of what prevent people from feeling safe and secure, and we will get into these moments in details. Another element for the safety model is the freedom of speech, not to be prosecuted for your civil activism and your position, mobility freedom, and it's a very important notion. It's not about the opportunity to be traveling around the world, but there is the opportunity of feeling that you can safely move inside of your settlements without the threat of being attacked. The full work of the law enforcement, the opportunities to protect your honor, and there's a participation in different social aspects of life, the protection from the external aggression and psychological security, and the right for a better future. So we are mentioning here, what we're mentioning here is basically this calmness situation to be sure that there is the horizon for the future planning available. We're going to discuss this problem further on as well. So this is basically the ideal assumption of what security is. What are those parameters that the person builds up their security assumption on? Later on, we've decided to ask for the people what causes them threats, what actually prevents them from feeling safe. And this is where the interesting things start, because we are now getting into details of those key moments for those models of security that we discussed above. We'll get in first of all closer to this physical aspect of security. So in this case, people are in details starting to tell us about that the person who lives in their everyday life, they feel the real and apparent threats of violent actions or aggression towards the person. And it really means that the person should really seriously invest both material and physical efforts in order to provide the personal security. So this is expecting this possible, real, or apparent threats really means that the person should buy additional security measures, buying the alarm system. So this again presupposes additional material expenditures. So these fears, they change the life of the person because they're starting to think, what is the time when they can go outside? What is the time when it's dangerous to go outside? So there is a big number of different restrictions and the big limitations to how you can build up your life. Another moment is the economical aspect of security. What we mean here is that a lot of people live under the condition that they do not have additional resources for security, additional resources for the planning your economical security further on. It gives additional fears towards the situation, especially the situation of the pandemic and lockdown. When people understand that losing your job can be a serious family catastrophe, and you do not know what are the other ways to manage the situation, it can have additional pressure over the person and only empower their feeling of danger. Another aspect, healthcare aspect, of course, it has been quite visible in the framework of the overall global pandemic, in the levels of the infected people increasing, and in level of the incapabilities of the medical systems, and a lot of fears that have been widespread in the media that the medical system is not going to be coping with the pandemic overall. We're speaking about the overall sector of the functioning of the state that is now in the transition period. You remember that the medical reform is as well process-wise. So there is also this misunderstanding and frustration of an average person who doesn't really know who they should contact and in what way. And of course, the same segregation that scares the people, infrastructure-wise, especially for the people who are living in the rural areas. They have reported that they don't have the normal transportation available, and so they cannot reach the regional center where there is the better approach to the healthcare services. And there is another point that is connected to this really problematic and challenging access to the professionals, because you have to first of all address one professional that's going to address you to another. This is something that really creates the lack of confidence, that you might not understand, you might be frustrated of how can you receive the best healthcare in the places where you live. The lack of the good social protection system and social security systems. What we mean by that, the social security systems is addressed system. They only work with a certain categories of population. Thus, let us put it in the brackets. The normal person, the average person that wouldn't fit under the categories of the vulnerable population, but that might be facing the situation of losing their work, they will not be confident that they have any certain system that will support them throughout this transition time when they just to live through this moment of this small individual social catastrophe. Another important moment that has been also widely seen, especially because we have spoken to the territories, especially on Donetsk and Luhansk region, we are speaking about the territories that have been under really huge impact of the military aggression, and they still have this memory of what war is, even though the people, they evaluate current situation as more or less safe, more or less sustainable, but the memories of war is really relevant and really actualized. Throughout this survey, the respondents and the participants of our survey, they're referring to those times in the past under the temporary occupation. It is very vivid and present in the current situation. And it once again really important for us, and it shows us that this work with processing and working with the past is really needed. It requires our serious attention and serious work, because the memory of the past has been reflected in our everyday situation and everyday considerations. As another moment of danger, there is the uncontrolled spread of weapons. There is the issue that should be discussed, widely discussed. We need to find the strategies for dealing with this issue, because the uncontrolled weapons is a very relevant issue for that society. And this is the factor for the people that actually empowers the physical aspect of danger. The person understands clearly they're not safe. They're not safe, absolutely unsafe, up till the moment that the weapons might be used against you. So this is how the image of this dangerous other is being created, and this specter of this dangerous another other that is very broad, like people who are like strange people on the other side of the street. So people like saying they're taking a different way just to go there, just they're making a lot of steps just to calm down their fear of this dangerous other. This dangerous other may as well be constituted in your business partner, because this already biased attitudes can be then positioned to all of the other people even that you know. That's not a new situation for the Ukrainian society. We have a lot of troubles with the institutional trust and confidence, but now we're speaking that even personal trust is being under the threat as the dangerous, as an indicator of danger. Another point is the problems that we currently have. It's once has been represented in both quality and quantity. We can see even in the closed questions and in open question in the quality research, the people are just mentioning the very same number of problem and threats. As overall for the country, we try to segment it. We try to see there's like the national wide problems, the problems on the level of the city, and then the personal level. So what it is that is influencing the life of the specific person. On the overall state level, the first number is the problem of stopping the war. Then there is the lack of money for food and the basic needs. And the third level on the third problem on the state level is the corruption for the representatives of the government. We have to discuss it separately, because we as well tried to get from the consultation to the explanation. When people are mentioning corruption, it's mostly about this low level of bribery, and of course, like the average person has no connection to the big corruptional schemes, but the information that has been provided by the media creates the image of the constant presence of this anti-corruptional discourse in the life of the average person. It provokes this person to the certain reaction of talking about the corruption, but not speaking on this everyday bribery that is a fact of their everyday reality. On the level of the settlements, there is once again the lack of money to provide your nutrition and to provide your basic need. And then there is the lack of the working places and unemployment. You can see that overall problem, we are now only speaking about the top notions that have been identified in all of the regions. If we speak about the quality component of the research, then we see that there is a huge number of the closed problems. The main problems, this is the war and the war that has to be completed, with no offers of the scenarios of how we can stop it, how we can complete it. So this is the topic is basically a default position. Every time that we're offering the people to discuss who should be negotiating the end of war, who is the parties to the conflict, it's really leading to the moment that the people are trying to avoid answering this question. So that is why the problem of war is articulated, but any kind of scenarios, discussion of the scenarios for that completion of the war are being silenced. So this is a very important moment. We're not using that because we don't know what will be the reaction of the population, because people do not want to express their position on the war freely. Then again, there is the corruption, which is in this level, in the level of the city, is the lower level of bribery that might be already known by the people. Then there is this poverty and this poverty trauma. And based on this poverty trauma, we have another image that we have already worked with, is the image of creating factories. Factories as the resolution of all of the problems. This is the Soviet model, when there is when there is the power plant that works, and that's only way of how you can find the working places. It creates this nostalgic understanding that basically there is a big enterprise that can resolve all of the problems with unemployment and all of the levels. There again, inequality and injustice, there is the whole full complex of understanding that law is not universal, is not equal, unequal access to the global goods, and this actually builds up the lack of the social perspective for people. If we speak about the problems on the level of the settlements, and we try to identify this separately problem and then divide it for the level of the state, for the level of the city, for the level of the personal level, for the personal level. But all of the respondents, they said that they're all interconnected. It cannot be divided like that. But on the level of the settlements, of the residential place, there are also the infrastructural problems that stand out. There is another important accent. They say that this is the main problem for the segregation. This is the main problem for why for example, rural populations cannot have the access for the good conditions and the good access to good education and healthcare. The healthcare problem as well is relevant. There's also as well the problems relevant with the Ukrainian school, because now in the rural areas there has been a lot of problems that the children didn't have any kind of lessons. They cannot communicate through Viber, and the Viber can only be communicated from only sending the task that you then should do with your parents. And of course, there are a lot of problems with school education that are currently relevant because of that. And then later on, after this period in our quality research, we're asking whether you're satisfied with your life. And you can see that on the level of 65, 68%, we have seen that there are people who are happy with their life, who are satisfied with their life, and who are satisfied with their position in this society. The segregation on the settlement-wise, it gives us the very same picture, more or less. It was with only one exception, that's the city can be concentrated. The city that is the center of the region is in their attention. The villages that can be in the center of attention, but the smaller cities, smaller towns, them can be outside of their global attention, and they can feel a little bit of discomfort with this moment. We had another point with concern with politics. The 66% of the respondents, they planned to participate in the local elections as voters, but the quality methods has given us the insight to the motivation of the people and their moods, and we can see that there is a very fatalistic position to that. Even though 66% they have said, less, we will participate in elections as voters, but people have identified that they believe that their participation in election is important, but in the same time will not influence anything. And then there is also the personal way of vote, and most of the voters, they will support the candidate because of their personal traits. A couple of other important moments that have also been visualized in the framework of our conversation on the level of their demands, and they want to see the long-term changes. They want to see the work into improving all of the spheres of our lifestyle. But as soon as you get to the motivation of their choice, they seem to support the candidates that are going to show the simple and visible results, the update of the roads, the good playgrounds. So this is the first break of the consciousness. We are expecting one thing to happen, but we support completely different. And we have a very high level of expectations that when you do not have the good level of the political activity yourself. There is the notions down of the political activities, what they do, what is the percentage of the people who are active in the political and social life. So this high expectation, they're systematically cause the disappointment of the electorate in the candidates that they have chosen. And we're losing the faith in the results of work of the state. It's a very important moment because in this case we see that there is a lack of understanding for the people of the competences of what people should be managing their lives on the territory and expecting that they will find the best resolution for all of the problems and this chaotic approach to the election can be as well explained to this moment that people do not care about anything, they're getting disappointed really fast, and they're looking for another political power that will do everything. I think that's we're really short in time. Yes, I know that you have 2 more slides, but let us do it in like 5-7 minutes if we may. Yes, of course, like you can take a look at that in details in our reports, but what I also wanted to identify for you about those specific moments. We've only been researching the 4 regions, but we know that under those sociological research that has been surveys that have been conducted all over Ukraine, and we can see that there is a very important shift off into the south and into the east for a number of issues. And you can see that right now at my slide, and they're very detailed in the report. There are some certain numbers of important issues, both international and domestic, that have certain reaction 50-50 that provides the division for the population. It gives us the understanding that we currently have the situation in our society when more or less the same sized groups have very different, completely different points of view on the same issue. That's a very complex issue, but in the complex stage, but it can also be as a transition period. If we consider the previous trends, then we can see that this territory is now that these issues are now with the critical mass who are oriented on those different models of seeing the current situation. You have a very different situation on the borders with Russia and the movement towards NATO. So it has this division almost half by half in our society. A couple of additional moments about that, especially in the social and demographical block, we as well try to work with the issues of the language and identity, which are very important for understanding of what kind of people live on those territories. And we tried to ask people on how do people feel themselves and how do they include themselves into some bigger context, like becoming the part of the Eastern Slavic world, or how do they believe they are the part of the language of the European world, or are they the part of the post-Soviet society? That's a very interesting aspect as well. You can see that in details in the report, very interesting details in the report. For example, when we speak about when people believe that they are the part of the unity of the post-Soviet republics, and we can see there is a close correlation of age. The younger the person is, then the lower this dependency is, and the less they believe that they're a part of that unity. And very paradox situation we have seen in the Lugansk region, because they in the same time believe themselves on the bigger level to be a part of the European space and to be a part of the post-Soviets and the former Union of the Soviet republics. So this is just to continue the discussion that is now currently discussed in Ukraine, when Lugansk region is quite positive on the European integration, but in the same time we have to understand that when you're asking them on the different parameters, that we can see this paradox in the consciousness when 2 different models then meet and there can coexist. And there is this law enforcement aspect, which is as well important. You can take a look in more details in the report. You can see where it works better, where it works worse. But a very important and paradox situation for myself was that the experience of collaborating with a law enforcement body does not build confidence and inclusion for the population. We've tried to reconnect these parameters, and we have to understand here why. It's not that much about the work of the law enforcement body, or is it good or bad. It doesn't mean about the experience that you have had, whatever experience you've had with that. But this is the overall question of culture in the society because of this fear of this dangerous other, because the people do not feel safe, they don't feel themselves protected, they do not want to collaborate with the law enforcement because they are afraid of revenge. They are afraid of revenge. They are afraid that the people who might be aggressive towards them will not be punished. It's a very important moment that has to be considered properly in order to build this collaboration links between the population and the law enforcement in order to fight this dangerous other as it is. Just to make it brief, and I think that if we'll have additional questions, we can cover that more. Yes, thank you very much, Oksana. By the way, you can already ask us the questions. You can write your questions down in the chat box. Those are the key results from our reports that has been presented by Oksana, and I will just make a very brief clarification issue for the final slide that Oksana has shown us. Can you please once again show that to us? Because you have been mentioning that the level to trust, to the confidence of the law enforcement and to the local government is not really high. So do you see this kind of interconnectedness between that there is the low confidence to both the government authority and to the law enforcement? You know, I was speaking in a much broader context. It's just like the overall trend for all of the territory of Ukraine. So this is the specific conditions for Ukrainians. I believe because for all of the time throughout the independence, we have this phenomena of the low institutional trust. I do not want to get in depth because, you know, I've been working with the historical aspect of the confidence to law enforcement. So we are once again getting to this model that we have kind of inherited from the Soviet Union, when the law enforcement can only be assumed as the protector for the state, that for the repressive state, but not as a model of the joint collaboration in the society that would like to set up the security standards. So this division for the law enforcement on one hand, on one side, and with the overall population on the other side, it's still preserved. Law enforcement is not considered to be the part of this, you know, joint communication and joint space, common space. So it's not something new for the Ukrainian society, but it is as well for the further consideration and further work. We need to step aside from that model, and we need to find, if we are really afraid of this dangerous other, so we have to find what are the common actions to fight that. How can we take down this problem in the end? Okay, thank you, Oksana. Yevhen Vilinsky, we would like to switch to you. You have a very interesting experience because you're one of the authors of this research, but as well you are the representative of one of the regions that have been researched, and you have worked in the executive authorities there. So what are the expectations from the regional authorities? Whether can be there, whether the data that we have received are corresponding the reality. So how can we find that? How can we find the like-minded people, and how can we build those trust trust chains to build up the more secure society? You have to unmute yourself as well. Yes, now I can hear you. Yes, thank you. Well, first of all, I would like to thank the Heinrich Bell Foundation for this research, and I do hope that we will have this opportunity, that I hope that we'll go into turn it into some kind of the serial research, because this kind of research is needed in order to identify some basic indicators, to follow the dynamics of those notions, and that can become the basis for the certain managerial and administrative decisions and resolutions to be taken not only on the regional but on the state level as well. So I'm really grateful for this report, and I'm asking all of the people who are here today to read out through the whole report, because it's much more better and thorough than what we have the opportunity to present today. As far as we will have as well my colleague Yevhen Hlibovitsky, who will be presenting after me with the overall global conclusions, then I think that I would like to draw your attention to something that might have been somewhere in the sidelines of our expert discussions, and as well to answer this issue on the regional government, on the local government that you might have. First of all, what is obvious that the issue of the human security is already finding the good feedback for most of the respondents. There is a feeling that it's not yet a basis for identifying the main policy on both local and regional level. What is what I have as well seen, that's what we feel is the lack of experience in collaboration on different levels. And that is how we have this lack of confidence and trust in collaborating between the authorities and society and population, between different layers of population. So I think further on, we should develop more attention to building up those connections between different social groups, the entrepreneurs. Like, the more connected, the more united will be, the more there will be that kind of real associations, the better. And of course, this topic of patronizing, that is maybe not indirectly, but seen everywhere. So this demands to the authority to stop the war, to end the war, and claims towards government and the journalists as the mediums for that, like, do not bring us bad news. That there is some certain thing that we should stop thinking that at some point, if you will change one person, like a president or the head of government or a mayor, and someone will do something instead of us. This is not going to happen. We need to have much more grassroots activities. We have this desire, like someone will come and set out our life instead of us to all of those issues. That's what we can see. No patronizing experience anymore for us. What we should all draw our attention to as well, that we should not concentrate on the non-instrumental methods, because the government, the central government, regional governments, they're trying to use the short-term tools that do not have the good evidential effectiveness proved. So in our really uncertain conditions, and I believe that this is the main understanding of the ideas like the free economic zones or techno parks that can be built under the challenging territories, which is really complicates our communication with our international partners when we are trying to show some fantastic figures for our needs. And of course, it as well builds up our reputation as an unconfident and loyal partner. What we should all concentrate on is on developing the high-quality strategical resolutions and on the detailed analysis of the risks that we have, all the risks, and let us put it, the backfires of all of our resolutions in place. So basically, we should be ready for the worst-case scenario, because in our case, it's much more probable, and we have to clearly evaluate all of the risks for us. Under those conditions, when we see that there is the lack of understanding sometimes for what is going on in the fields, we do not have the clear understanding in the central government what is going on in the regions. And this brings us to the idea that the regional authorities are very important now. The regional authorities cannot be the passive executors of the orders from Kiev. The regional authorities closer to the field, they know the problems of each region, and there should be the coordinators of the certain projects, and they should be initiating, the authority should be initiating most of the programs for the development of the regions. You should not count on all of that from the side of the central government. Of course, we know that the overall role for the regional government is being changed under the decentralization process, and thus we have to have more emphasis for trying to equalize and balance mostly basic opportunities of the communities. The community should not be finalized more or less, or whether there is or not the certain lobbying interest there, or whether it belongs to some certain financial or economical groups. So those things, they are going to be finally seen in those indicators and those results that that kind of decision gives to us and research gives to us. There is the issue of how we consider the security indicators on the local level, especially throughout the elections. And here, in this case, we can see this duality that Oksana has told us about in action. That's on one hand, we are saying, yes, of course, we should consider all of that when we are making our choice, but then when we are in our electoral precincts, then we're thinking like, but oh, I think I like this guy, I like how he looks like, or he promised to build up a factory, or he promised that he will give us a cheaper sausages, or some other things. So we know there's no more rational ways of choosing, but there are some really vague expectations that are getting in the role. Oksana hasn't also mentioned that there is this image of the power of the factory that is being really abused here. Like that has to be something working, there has to be some kind, we need to know where do we go to this specific work on a daily basis. So this is one of those representatives of and those entitlement of the patronizing opinion. So like we are going to be told of what to do with our lives further on. So it's not just this factory that no one is actually offering any kind of alternative image, for example, for Donetsk or for Lugansk or for Kherson and Zaporizhia regions. They all been considered as this kind of industrial regions. I have even heard this discussion on the reform of the coal mining regions, but it's basically means about reforming the sector, but not reforming all of the sectors of life of these regions and the people of these regions, which is the element of human security overall, because in those mono cities, there this working industry, it's not only responsible for the water supply, energy supply, healthcare, or social sphere objects. That's all managing by the main enterprise. And only reforming one direction in the city is not the right way to do that. And that is why, because those basics, those human security bases are being under danger, are being ruined, then only closing down of any kind of enterprises is being treated as by population as the end of their life as it used to be before. Speaking on the political preferences, of whether the political preferences are changed, on whether there is still the personal choice that is being done based on your personal preferences. I had some certain observation at the local elections. Of course, there are certain rhetorics that are really liked by certain populations and electorates, but there is no loyalness to the certain political powers or political parties. It might be connected to the idea that we do not really have ideological parties. We have a lot of like political poor projects, but we have not a single ideological political party. We had some cases and funny cases when, for example, I was told that through the political campaign, we've had a lot of smaller local projects that were once again built up for a certain personality, but the overall parties, the state level parties, they basically sold their franchises to the people. And one of the public servants who had his own party. He has a franchise of support of both the oppositional platform for life and the servants of the people. And, you know, his network of his campaigners has been campaigning for three powers, for three political parties. Like, you know, they've just got these three types of leaflets together and given it all for their voters. And you know, there is a question as well for the sellers of those franchises, but what I have seen that yes, some certain stories they're ending up that's the very same servants of the people didn't get what they expected to see in their local governments, in the local authorities, because of this kind of the work approach that they have had. What has to be identified as well, even under those conditions, even under those circumstances, we have seen that, well, everyone has expected that the oppositional party for life is going to have the majority in those regions, but it didn't happen. So the issue of the political competition is still relevant and it exists. And in my opinion, that there is the question that we do not have the good offer enough, especially on the progressive and liberal parties. We do not have this offer presented in the East, and that is a big problem. And they are needed at least to build up some competitive ideas for both the local and the central governments. So this political competition is very important notion overall. So basically, this is what I wanted to identify when we are evaluating the results of the research for the further on future policies, both central and local. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Yevhen. And Yevhen has already made this brief spoiler that's in the research that is already available at our site, and you can download it even without our email being getting you informed about that. You can already see that the information, what are the expectations for the population, of what kind of political force you would like to support, and what is the overall opinions towards different political powers and political parties. So once again, supporting Yevhen's arguments, I think that you can take a look at well to this chapter on the political moods in our research. And I would like to pass the floor to Yevhen Glebovitsky. And you know, Yevhen Vilinsky and Oksana Mikheeva has already mentioned this notion that population is not considering security in the very narrow sense, but there are very high and broad expectation that is overall a welfare and a well-being that means a lot. So like I can get safely to the closest hospital, or I am sure that my voice will have its meaning during the local election. So this is a very broad composition of the elements of the human security. So they're all represented in our report as well. So having that said, what kind of recommendation you can sum up based on the results of this research? Well, I would like to start with some of the recommendations to explain some of the recommendations that we have had in our research. Well, just a second, I will share my screen.
Намагаюся зрозуміти, чому.
Було видно тільки що.
We could see your screen and could see your presentation. Yes, you could see, but I couldn't switch to the next slide. So I was trying to figure out how to do that and what was the problem with that.
Я зараз спробую зробити інакше.
So I'll try just to do that
Якщо ми говоримо про рекомендації, то
other way around.
рекомендації ми могли, по-перше, зменшити.
If we speak on the recommendation, so what we mean, we wanted to first of all mitigate the feelings of anxiety in the society, to mitigate as well this and the feelings of the anxieties because of many reasons, because of the trauma, first of all, because it's really complicated, it's really hard for the person who doesn't have enough social competences to evaluate what are the risks from the overall environment they have. There is uncertainty, and the uncertainty is a discomforting feeling for all of the cultures, but in Ukrainian cultures is a completely uncomforting and discomforting because there is a certain tradition and a certain understanding that uncertainty presupposes risks. And another moment is for us to take down the conditions of the zero sum, which basically means that the approaches of the zero sum, and those are the approaches that we need to avoid. So when we're speaking, it's either you will do something or you will be the subject of something. So you're either winning or losing. So we cannot get to the situation when we're going to have both, when we're going to be having the win-win situation for both of the sides. And speaking on the recommendations as well. So if we speak about certain recommendations based on the structure of the report, then we should structure them into three groups. The first group, I guess, and it's the most complex because it's the least obvious and it really presupposes a lot of serious changes to take place, a lot of serious changes in all of the subject. It has to take change for the state authorities, for the business actors, for the social actors and activists. It first of all uniting and integrating the interfaces of the local authorities, of the local governance with the interfaces of the authority itself. While synchronizing our legislation with the European Union, we can, for example, take the various complex institutional solutions from the experience of the European countries. We can try to build up complex systems of the reporting systems or integrating systems. The problem is that if the people didn't have the practice of using these complex systems, and if there is no trust for these complex rules, they will not be using fully those opportunities that the systems provides. If that actually means that we need to have a complex system with a very simple interface, then it doesn't mean that means that we need to have an additional interface that would consider the peculiarities of the society, that will consider the peculiarities of Ukrainian managerial and administrative culture, or it means that the design itself should be creating the solution of this level of complexity that the person at a certain level can manage. Another issue is the raising awareness on the public management, because it's very important and critically important, because as Oksana has said, a lot of people, they do not understand what kind of state body is responsible for what is the overall functions of the state institution. Another point is building up the strategical discourse overall. In other words, if we are meaning where are we going to, what can be reached, in the what time framework it can be done, what are the perspectives for the certain city, for the certain region, for the certain professions. We do not see that the society, they do not have the good understanding of the strategical goals and discourse. It's not only influencing certain strategical decision, it influences our everyday decisions as well, for the professional choices, for example. It influences on how the young people, they are making their decision of whether they would like to go or stay in their settlements, and how the people of middle age, they have another resolution of what are they going to do in their career strategies. Are they going to stay in the framework of what is clear for them in the same clear and known industries and professions, or are they trying to find something new for themselves? Another separate issue is building up the applicable long-term vision, strategies and plans, and the practices of their implementations. If we're speaking about the successful strategies, if we're speaking about the successful constructing of your own future, then we have very few examples so that people would see how that perfectly works. There is very few cases, there are very few cases when we can just say that here in our Ukrainian practice, there was no solution here, here how the solution was brought up, here how it was implemented. This practice is becoming fuller, is becoming embodied more and more, because we have a lot of efforts that have been dedicated to strategical approaches. We can see that have been first successful cases on the level of the local governance. We have some certain good strategical cases with the reform on the state level. We have some good cases of the strategical collaboration between the civil sector and public sector in Ukraine. We have a lot of examples like that in businesses. So those examples, they have to be available. They have to be available and accessible. They have to be explained and communicated properly. A separate third group of conclusions and recommendation is that we have to communicate the intent and the actions in the reforms, in the changes, for the changes that are going to be provided, in order to mitigate uncertainty, because we can see that in the pipeline of the resolutions for the specific administration, for the specific authority, and all of the other actors, they can fit into that. Today, we see the completely opposite situation in place. So if you, for example, follow the perceived level of the forecasting, if you compare this government with the previous government, it would be the less forecasted, the less predictable government of all. And then there is also the collaboration with the law enforcement institution, because the law enforcement has a delegated function of the controlled violence. So they are basically the only institutions who can use violence against the members of the society. And it is very important that this law enforcement would not become risks itself. And if they're becoming risks, we have to discuss it. Now we have the problem with the communication openness and the accountability of the law enforcement institutions toward the society. The society has no clear understanding how this culture, how this managing scheme inside of the law enforcement it looks like there are some really bad some really bad assumptions till that have been supported by the very bad incidents happening throughout the recent years. So there is, of course, the idea of whether we can break this situation up, whether we can break this line, or whether it can, on the other hand, can be supported further on, and then the society will understand what to do to protect itself. Another very important issue then gets in from the local level to the regional level is the understanding what is the level of mobility, the minimum level of mobility, for us to be able to understand after what level of mobility that there is the loss of losing of connection between the people from certain region or certain settlement with all of the other countries. So we have very different mobility throughout all of our countries. So the question of mobility is very important. And another very important recommendation is the issue of the educational and extracurriculum exchanges between the regions when we have different cultural practices in place. So it's critical, if it's of critical importance, so that those regions that have different cultural practices in place for them to become the regionals for the cultural exchange, and not to be only the territorially very expanded regions, but it just have to be the territorial difference, but not the cultural difference further on. The local level, the critical important issue is the level of the development of educational and critical thinking, because without the critical thinking and proper education, we will not be able to get to the certain next quality of building up our social relations. This is an issue that is very important, and this issue should be continuously controlled in the field, in the location, because it's not only about the overall framework of the educational reform, which is, of course, for the state level to decide, but in what way this framework for the educational reform is implemented, whether the schools are good or bad, whether the schools are teaching their students good or bad. This is the question, first of all, for the local authorities. Then overall support of the judicial practices. We have to understand that we should get from the democratic centralism practices, the so-called Soviet principle that is sometimes included in our managerial practices most of all, to subsidiarity principles in our administration, which is basically states that every problem should be resolved at the lowest level possible. And in this case, the practices of our assemblies of the house owners, of the local self-government for the amalgamated communities or in the cities has the biggest importance. Developing the competences and the strategy of the strategical thinking at the local level. In this way, we can have the sustainable resolution for the issues that are really sensitive for the local people. And this is the very good importance issue. So you can have this opportunity to have the strategical decisions for what is important for you. And getting the physical security feelings, the good lighting of the streets, the visible presence of the law enforcement representatives. So something that has been broken that will be repaired, all of those issues, it really matters, so that the society would have this higher level of feeling of your own safety as well. And the final thing is mostly directed towards our international donors, because they are one of those people who are really influencing the capability of the local subjects, of the local authorities. So they are basically the ones who can be the drivers and the catalyzers and the empowerment enforcement for the local initiatives. And would be very important, so we would have much more coordination in place between the international donors, so they would empower one another in their projects. If it would be as well important that, especially if we are speaking about if we're speaking about developing the strategical approach, then it's very important that the strategical thinking would be for both the political players and the social players a very important issue that can be addressed to donors as well, the activating of the cultural and social life of the people in the East, because the culture gives us the skills that builds up our skills to have the strategical planning and planning for future in place to find some good and creative solutions and unpredictable solutions. So the intensity of cultural life, it correlates with your opportunities to help yourself. Developing the practices of the modern urban planning, so like improving the quality of your life, supporting the micro granting. So basically, it's very important to have the support with micro granting to build up the local system for building up those grants or disseminating those grants. We have the very good experience with urban space 100 in Ivano-Frankivsk when the money are made locally and they're going to be then investing their money for the further on local development. And there's a lot of money because in those micro grants that have been allocated on an annual basis, we have more than 1 million hryvnias a year for that in the small city. Those are the small projects, and you don't even have to be registered as the organization, but it gives you the opportunity to build up the space with many different initiatives, and it gives up the opportunity for the people who have some certain initiatives to have the resources in place, and as well developing the educational moment for the opportunities of the economy. And as well as we have already seen, the only economy for the people in this region is the industrial economy. Another issue, so how do we see that this harmony with nature, it is important that overall ideas of caring about environment has to be in the core of any kind of resolution in place, because this is as well security that can be provided from the external environment where the person lives. Thank you. Thank you very much, Yevhan. And to continue with your recommendations, I can speak of urbanistics and the urban development sphere support, because as a foundation, we are working with this direction as well. So first of all, we are going to be continuing developing the urbanistic development here. Thank you very much to all of our presenters. So we have had a couple of questions already. We will start with Andriy Lucek. So have you researched the influence of the decentralization reform and whether they are influencing the level of confidence and trust to the local authorities, and whether it influenced how the society is being included into the work of the local authorities? Yes, I see that there are 3 questions. Maybe I can answer all of the 3 of those questions so I can give the colleagues opportunity to comment on what do they see to that. So, okay, first of all, that wasn't our direct focus to see the connection between decentralization. And unfortunately, as Natalia has mentioned, we didn't manage to fully complete this assumption that we had, because those settlements where the amalgamated community have already been created, they do not have long history in place to see the crucial difference. But there wasn't our direct focus of the research, but we can see the difference straight away between the people who have experience in working in the assembly of the house owner, and we have been working with both examples and cases with both positive and negative. The positive cases, negative cases, when the person is the driver for the progress, they show how they can be do it, people are not engaging, so this once again, this perspective is being closed for this active person. And another option when there is possible for people to build up the good results on their initiatives, and this is a completely different result. They're building a different people, a different approach, people re-evaluating what they can do. The very same things about the overall population when we're speaking about the amalgamated communities. People who have experience with working with amalgamated communities, when you are switching to this conversation, what has changed since they have got to the status as the positive switch? Before, the people have been discussing problems, but here people starting, of course, they are speaking, there are some certain problems that they have lost their jobs because of this change. Some people have changed their life completely. There are certain problems, of course, but this effect of engaging and engagement of that you are doing something with your own environment and you can feel the change, it actually switches this person to this engagement and much more positive evaluation of the results that they actually have. So that is a very important moment in place, and I believe that the assemblies of the house owners and the amalgamated communities, they have to be in the focus of our attention, because it gives us the good attention of how can we engage people and turn on this positive approach towards reality. Another question on the paternalism. How do we understand this patronizing? This is the idea of the authority that will resolve everything. So we are speaking that the people are expecting that there's going to be someone other who will resolve all of their problems. There is not a controversy from that why it is combined with a low level of the trust to the local authorities. Well, local authorities, they're not performing their parental functions. And that is why they have this low level of trust. So the system works properly. We expect that there's going to be someone who will decide everything instead of us. They didn't do that, so that is why there is low level of trust towards them. So I see no controversy about that. And the third question was that yes, we've had one focus group that has been built in one of the rural areas. Then yes, there are some specifics. Let us voice out the question, because maybe people, have you had conducted your research among the people in the Lugansk region on the border with the Russian Federation? If yes, then are there any differences? Yes, there are differences, and it's not a very news for me, because like maybe we should not even speak about it, because all of the levels, all of the territories that are close to the border have very high level of the trans-border migration. So the people work in Russia, children that are being taught in Russia. So what we're saying, whether it's like distance education now through Zoom, but we have to understand that it's a trans-border territories, and those territories, they still have the very high level of this trans-border practices, trans-border communication, and trans-border connections. Thank you, Oksana. Maybe some of the colleagues would like to add up something to Oksana's comments. Yevhen Vilinsky, please. I wanted to add up a little bit for the role of the assemblies of the house owners, because this is a very important tool. The only question here is that it's very important, so that it was a union, an independent union and autonomous union, because we have the examples in some of the cities in Donetsk region where there's basically the municipal enterprises that just have been transformed and called as an assemblies of the house owner. They're like, the simulacra. There are just only simulations of these assemblies. They're not that in the sense. So they're only actually postponing the right development of this reform. And I have seen at our foundation page, there are some certain recommendations for donors as well in the Facebook page. You can see, and Yevhen has already voiced those recommendations for our donoring organization as well. But I would add up to that our biggest recommendation for that would be to constantly monitor, maybe with the help of this kind of research as this one, just to monitor the effectiveness of every single project. Because every donorship project, they have to be coordinated, clearly coordinated with the project of the central authorities or the local authorities, and they have to empower one another. Because sometimes I think that the donor projects are being considered as, just to get a little bit of something, if they give us something, that let us at least have that. But sometimes it causes to, let us say, consumer approach towards that, and in long-term perspective it doesn't give the effect that they have been aiming for, because basically we have already seen that there are really low level of capacities for the overall coordination on the central level, and there is a lot of attention that has to be delivered to this coordination on the local level, on the regional level. And we believe that there is this experience already in Donetsk region. In our times, we have been really closely collaborating and coordinating the overall donor processes. So we will not have the coordination in place. It will be just once again ad hoc activities that will not change the situation significantly. Thank you, Yevhen. We have two more questions. Could you please tell us about the level of monopolization of economy and their influences on the society, whether there is differences for these four regions in that? And another issue that we've had a couple of questions on Facebook, maybe Natalia Zaitseva-Chupak can answer that. So it means that the settlements where doesn't have access to the internet and with a lower number of population, you haven't conducted this research. Can you tell us a little bit more of that? Well, we have conducted this survey in many different settlements, and even in those settlements that doesn't have internet, because our program and our software gives us opportunity to gather the information on templates and then systemize it later on when we get back to the regional center and had this access to Wi-Fi. So we had both quality and quantity surveys conducted in the small settlements as well, and those who didn't have the access to internet. And for example, one of the villages that we mentioned in the Lugansk region, we've just went there physically because we didn't have this opportunity to organize the Zoom call and Zoom meetings with us. If we mean about the focus group, we had some certain settlements where internet was only available in 2 or 3 houses, and the people just went there to one of those locations to talk. And we've covered many different settlements, those who are a part of the amalgamated community already, just to make our research representative as much as possible. Thank you, Natalia. On monopolization of the economy and its influence on society, who would like to cover that? Well, I think that I will start. And maybe Yevhen Hlibovitsky will continue with that as well, because basically the level of monopolization in Donetsk region is really high, and you can say that as well. And there are those mono cities that I have already been mentioning, and it's very important when we are developing those strategies of the reform of Donbas, the reform of the eastern regions. It's very important for us to consider what kind of effect and what kind of impact all of these measures will have for both economical and social life, because there is the big danger for once again creating the simulacra for the civil society organization and the civil activity. So we are not only speaking about creating the economical monopoly, but actually the social and political monopoly in the region. I really afraid that when we are speaking of building up the free economical zone, then it can actually become a tool of preserving the status quo. So the number of oligarchs can have some certain preferences preserved to just improve their influence and to isolate this region even more, because we can get back to the situation, for example, of 2013, when we have created the additional preconditions for a higher escalation of the conflict than it is now. So I do believe that it is very important to demonopolize all of the aspects of life, the economical, the social and political. Thank you, Yevhen. Yevhen Lubovitsky, would you like to add up something? Well, I would like to add up to, if we're speaking about monopolization of the economy, then I think that we're going to have the different picture in different cities and in different territories. But we are only started of, building up on the surface of this measure. I don't want us to start speculating on that in depth, because it's quite obvious that Kherson region is very different from the Zaporizhia region. Zaporizhia is different from Donetsk, Donetsk from Lugansk region. So if we're going to start to make this generalization and assumptions, then we will step aside from the evidence base that we've had. And it is very important for us that this discourse would have evidence base behind it. That would be very interesting for us to continue in discussing it with the specialists in economy. It would be very interesting for us to continue and discussing it with the specialists from the local governance, with businesses, because it's just the very beginning of this discussion. You've started this issue, but let us try to abstain from the answer at this moment. Yes, and can I have as well a brief comment to that? Because if we are getting to these issues between the differences, no, there's no big differences, but there are different variations. I would call it variations, but not differences. There are some certain notions for each of the specific territories, but we are basically speaking on the close context for all of those territories. So yes, variations, yes, it has to be considered as well. Okay, thank you. And the final question that we have in our Zoom chat, and I think that after this question we're going to start, and that's this final question of how donors, and I would use this term of donor community, how the donor community sees the opportunity for the future collaboration, especially with the rural communities, considering the automation and urbanization processes. Well, I would take the risk to say that we're speaking on two processes that are happening in parallel. The first process is the process of depopulation of the smaller rural settlements and the rural communities. That is an active process. People are living, young people are living the rural territories, people who can work, because basically they have this certain amount of factors for that. And I wouldn't just like say that that's only the economical factor that is the important, because people leave, there's no work, there's no money. There is a lot of work most of the times, and there is even with higher economical effect for the budget of the specific family or the household. The issue is that there are many other factors except for economy. There is the factor of human security that in many cases, when you live in the rural area, will improve. There is the factor of interest. For a longer period of time, we have lived under this iron curtain, and right now you have this opportunity to go from Kherson to go to Poland or to Austria straight away. That's always very interesting. That's relatively cheap. That's very interesting. And people are going to work, for example, just to gain some sort of social experience as well. Some people will stay abroad. Some people will come back. There are many, many different situations with that as well. But we have to understand here clearly that because of this automation that you have mentioned, then the number of the jobs will decrease, but it doesn't mean that it will decrease the jobs for the people who will stay in the rural areas. Because when we're speaking about the automation of the industry and the production, it means that there are certain jobs will decrease, but there are some certain additional jobs that will increase. Like, for example, you will now have the engineers that will have to maintain those machines. So this is something that we have already seen throughout the structure of the small settlements. The vacancies for these highly qualified professionals that cannot be fulfilled, that cannot be covered for years and months to come, because there are certain cultural barriers that prevent the people with certain qualifications to get interested in those offers. Because if you have the certain qualification, if you have the good job, for example, in some certain village that is corresponding these qualifications, but you don't have the time spending in the evening, you don't have a good school for your children, then we're getting to the very same factor that we have researched that Oksana has presented to us. There is much more broader issues about that, and we have to consider it as well. And a separate topic that hasn't been brought up yet, but is going to be brought up in future, there is an issue of migration into Ukraine. Because in certain moments, especially, for example, if we're speaking about the collection industries, like, for example, they're located in the rural areas, not in the cities, for example, in Western Ukraine. When we're speaking about the growth of the production of industrial needs for the labor force, then at some certain moment, applying for those positions are not going to be not only Ukrainians who's going to be applying for that. And there's going to be the challenge for that, for Ukrainian identity and how the people who are going to come to Ukraine are going to coexist together. We have some time to get prepared to that, for this cultural adaptation, for get prepared for all of our institutions to think of how those issues will take place and shape those. But I believe that that's one of those challenges that is coming much faster and less expected, and not as we have been prepared to that. Thank you, Yevhen. We have around 5 minutes left, so unfortunately, if we will have additional questions, that we will try to answer those questions after the discussions. But at this moment, I would like to wrap up and just finalizing our discussion. I think that if we would like to answer the question in what way this research can be used for our further own activities and overall, I would like to stick to this opinion that overall the policies that have to be based on the evidence, and this research is basically the evidence that we can be basing on. So The policies should be evidence-based, and you can use it for the further on development of the local strategies, national strategies. It can be used as well as the basis for the population to learn what it is that is combines us, that unites us. What are the fears that are maybe as well uniting us? Is it the issue of decentralization, or is that an issue of the assembly of the house owners? Of maybe we can mobilize the activists to support the issues of the human security in their settlements. So we believe that this research can be the basis for the further on strategical thinking. Those 92 pages of data, and in our chat I'm going to send you the link to that, and because you can already use it from our site, you can download it from our site as well. But the final thesis that I want to use to wrap up all of our today's discussion, the key thing that we have been discussing, the human security, is something that is very complex issue. It's not the law enforcement solely. That's not the issue of war. It is healthcare as well. It is the care of the environment and personal safety and security. So that person, in order for the person to feel safe, there is a number of factors that is needed to be completed and complied to. And there is the certain factors like building collaboration between the local authorities, between the population and the national authority in order to get to the certain changes and create a secure environment. It's not an issue that can be resolved overnight. I do not believe that there's going to be any kind of quick win that we can reach, but still again, we're providing this research so that we will be able to strategically approach how we can use it and integrate it into our society further on. So thank you very much to all of our today's presenters. Thank you very much, Natalia, for this scope of data that we have managed to attain in this critically important period. Thank you, Oksana, for coordinating and developing the toolkit for the working with this research. Yevhen Vilinsky, Yevhen Glebovitsky, thank you for your expertise, and thank you very much for shaping this research as we have it right now. I would also like to thank the team of Heinrich Böll Foundation. Thank you very much for the support. I would like to thank Serhiy Sumlenny, and our Victoria Solohoub and Anastasia Kushnerenko from the Heinrich Böll team. And thank you very much for the support of all of the foundation's team that has joined us in the framework of this process. Also, as well, would like to thank our interpreters who helped us with the language support for today's event. And you can see our research is already available at the page of Foundation of Heinrich Böll Foundation. So please take a look at this Facebook page, and you as well will attain the research together with the link of the recording of our today's meeting. Thank you very much for your participation. We will really gladly work on your feedback if you have any ideas or comments, and I wish you all the best and all the productive week. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.